Hi, it's Mike Stevenson. Today we're going to take a look at a serverless 360 video. This is going to use the business activity monitoring feature of serverless 360, and we're going to look to provide self-service for business super users and support operators of an employee onboarding integration built with Logic Apps. So if we imagine we're building an integration platform on Azure Integration Services, we've got a platform that probably looks something a little bit like this, where in this particular solution, we're going to be using Logic Apps to integrate with various systems. We've got API management involved as well. We've got, I think if I remember right, we've got Service Bus for Pub Sub, and there could be a number of other technologies that you might use. And the challenge is when we build these solutions, we have them sort of decentralized across Azure in different resource groups and different resources. And we can use serverless 360 business applications to manage the Azure resources. But what we really want to do as well is also have that management at a higher level abstraction. So in business applications in Azure, you're managing the resource itself. Is my Logic app healthy? Is my API healthy? In business activity monitoring, we want to focus on managing, is that onboarding business transaction healthy? Has there been any errors? Do we need to do any work for it? So the challenge with serverless 360 is trying to address is this support problem where the more applications, integrations, and solutions we build on Azure, the bigger the support burden becomes. So our experts in Azure and our developers over here become burdened with a high level of support. And the problem is the more applications we build, the more time gets taken up by these people. And what we really want to do is provide other people who are part of the ecosystem of that solution the ability to help. But the challenge is they don't have any visibility. The Azure portal is too complex and there's too much risk of doing things incorrectly. And they have limited experience of the solution technically to do the things you need to do. So in Serverless 360, we have these four modules that we build that aim to help people make it easier to support your Azure solutions. Today in this video, we're going to be talking about business activity monitoring here, focusing on shifting the support left to allow business super users to self-service and to give level 1 and level 2 support operators the ability to do more. So really we're looking at this scenario here. Can we let these people be involved in supporting these employees being onboarded to take the support burden away from your developers and to give a better experience to your users? And ideally, when an employee turns up on their first day, if everything's been correctly processed and managed, that makes it easier for your employees starting at the company. So business activity monitoring offers a few features. The idea is to, like over here, we create a view of your business transaction and how it's implemented, what it looks like. Now, if we take a Logic app, for example, a Logic app to onboard a new user might have a couple of hundred shapes if it's doing a lot of complicated stuff. That's way too much complexity to show a business super user or a level 1, level 2 support engineer. We really need to create a higher abstraction so we can see we've got a new user, we've updated them into Active Directory, we've onboarded them into the library system or the training system or something like that. And these higher level concepts are what we really need to help those people see. So we can, once we've got that, we can do track and trace to help troubleshoot, spot problems. We can have out of the box monitoring capability to tell us when things have gone wrong, tell us when things have taken too long to execute and that kind of thing. Now, the requirements for today's example are we've got employees who are on board, and we're going to try and automate that experience to onboard them into different systems and do different setups. We want to check if the team can be able to troubleshoot problems and check users got set up correctly and deal with any errors. So how this solution's implemented is we've got SAP SuccessFactors as our HR system. We've got a solution over here. So we've got this Poland solution that's checking success factors for any new employees. It can be using a Logic app with a Poland trigger. We might use API management as a proxy, so the calls to success factors might go through API management, and then we publish messages onto Service Bus every time a new employee is onboarded. Now, with Service Bus, we can then trigger different interfaces, and in this case, because we've got a brand new employee, we're going to do this setup process. So the first thing we do is here we've got an interface that has a Logic app that triggers from Service Bus. We have some functions and some API management usage, and we can integrate into Active Directory, and we can create that new user's AD account, so we can provision it, get it set up with the right things, and that's the first of our micro interfaces that we're building. Now, after the user's set up in AD, we can then trigger via Service Bus all of these other interfaces over here. So we can basically pub sub build new interfaces. So if we have a new system comes along that needs some kind of integration after the user's been set up in AD, we can just plug a new interface on. And actually, I think I've missed the line off here. So we can, that would be a good example if we added a new interface to integrate them into groups. So here we've got this one would set up their groups in AD, again using functions, Logic Apps, API management. We had an interface that is a Logic app, which would use an automation account on Azure that would run some PowerShell on a VM that would integrate with our Exchange server and configure email accounts and set up some stuff there in Exchange for that user. We then have Logic Apps over here that uses API management to call a third-party system for our learning system. And likewise, we've got a Logic app that uses API management for our benefits system. And we also have other interfaces that over time we would plug and play onto this. So we had some where we would integrate with a flat file for an old school FTP to a third party for new users to be registered in some of their systems. So you can see we've got a lot of stuff going on here. Now, if you think of the support overhead for this, the great thing is we've got these small little interfaces that leverage various bits of our platform. So we're reusing our API management instance, we're reusing our Service Bus, we're reusing our Logic app host, and we're building these small, easy to change, easy to add interfaces that on their own are a small overhead. However, when we've got lots of them and we think this is just one process, if we scale this across the many processes your business might have, that's challenging to understand, firstly, how this works, and secondly, how to manage it, how to troubleshoot any problems and that kind of thing. And even things like if you think that new user triggers, how do you get the holistic view across all of these interfaces to know that all of them were successful? That's really one of the challenges on the Azure platform. So what we're able to do is we can add Serverless 360, which allows us to send telemetry from our different interfaces to the BAM API, and that lets us build business-friendly views of those transactions that are executing. So we can let that level 1 and business super user see what's going on. We can let them track through the execution, know which transactions were successful, which had problems. We can optionally let them see data if we want them to see what some of the data looked like or what some of the error messages looked like. And we can even use features to allow them to repair or resubmit a message. So let's say, for example, one of these groups had an error over here. We can configure it so the user could reprocess that message and it could go through. So the benefit there is they wouldn't have to raise a support ticket to the help desk. They could try reprocessing it themselves. If everything's good, then there was never a support ticket. But at least if they do have to raise one, they can pass that business transaction to the level 1 support operator alongside the ticket. Now, if we take a look at a demo here, the home page for Serverless 360 that you can see here has the 4 modules that we mentioned earlier in the slides, and I can go into the business activity management, business activity monitoring module, and you can see I've got my tree view here. That we find a lot of customers really like this tree view to be able to see the structure of their events in BAM. So you can have your business processes for human resources are in here, and I can click on my person sync process, which has all of my onboarding in. Now straight away you can see I've got this grid where I've configured the view that I want for managing these transactions. So you can create a bunch of different searches with different fields and things like that on. But I've set my default search where it shows me the transaction, target and destination systems. And I think for a support perspective, the ID, the name, the email, and the username are the key fields that I care about for troubleshooting these particular processes. Now, what I would be doing in business activity monitoring is I'd have to define my transactions. So here I've got a bunch of different transactions in this process. So I've got the success factors new hire polar. You can see this is just checking that we've started and completed a batch. So let's say every half hour it'll go and check and see if we've got any new hires. I've then got the new hire transaction where I just publish each individual record. So you would see in the grid for every new hire that starts, we would have one new hire transaction showing their message got published to Service Bus. I've then got this more complicated process. So this is the first one where the new hire gets integrated into Active Directory. So you can see here I've got stages for Logic Apps. So I've got my message received. I'm looking up the existing user to see if they already exist or not, and I might throw an error. I configure my manager lookup, and I can, these are the common places where there might be a problem. So if the manager doesn't exist, you might see an error here. Now the Logic app might have a lot more shapes in it, and these are just the simplified view showing what's going on. So when I configured this transaction, I can set up things like properties on the message. So here on the start, I know I'm going to get sent a message which will have the global user ID, the first name, the last name. So I can, in these cases here, I'm using a JSON path to pull a value out of the message body to set a property. But I can also use HTTP headers would be any metadata that gets sent over. An XPath would pull a data out of an XML message, and I can also supply a constant. So one of the things that I've done here is I've got a source and target system, which I find a lot of the support people and business users find it easy to understand that an interface is moving data from Service Bus to Active Directory is easy enough for them to understand. So just putting these as constants on the view that you would see for troubleshooting makes it easy for them to relate that to what they think the system does. Now, what I can also do is I can also configure reprocessing. So you can see here I've configured that this shape, if I want to reprocess this transaction, I can choose different shapes to reprocess from. But if I want to reprocess from here, it'll send the message body that got archived to a Service Bus queue that can then re-trigger the interface. So we'll have a look at that a bit more in a moment. Now, the next thing I would do is in my Logic Apps, I'm going to go over to the Azure portal now. So in my new hire Logic app, this is where when you configure Serverless 360, you can set up a connector where you've got the ability to see in Logic Apps, you've got this start transaction shape, and then you can do these checkpoints. So what I'm doing here is I'm sending a message body, a bit of data, a metadata, and then I'm saying this is the business process, this is the transaction, this is the step I'm at. Was it successful? Do I want to archive the message? And there's a bunch of other optional properties as well. And then what I would do is that when my transaction starts, I would tell BAM it started. And then when I need an update, I would just execute a checkpoint to tell me this is the latest status. So I can supply additional message bodies if I want. So here on my manager lookup, I'm saying there's a new message body that will also get added. And then at the end, that's where I would say that the transaction's complete. So if we go to serverless 360 here, you can see we had some users got processed this morning. So down here, if we look at Urban Dunlap, so we can see I clicked on him, it opens up, I can go and view the metadata, so we've got the source and destination systems, I can view the message body here that triggered that person's onboarding, so we can see that person's a new user here. Now, what I can also do is, we looked at the manager lookup before, so here I had an additional message body where I might have looked up the common name of the manager and AD for adding that user. So that would be one thing I could do for troubleshooting. You can also archive, if you want an error message, you can send that to BAM as a message body as well. And really, that's supposed to be how easy it is. So I can set my business transaction up. I can send one shape to it. So let's say I did the start message, the message received starting shape here. If I set that up, then any other events that match this transaction will show up here, and then the mapped bit would indicate whether they matched a shape in the diagram. So you don't even need to build the full diagram to begin with. You just send your events to it, and then you can go and add the other shapes on the diagram later once you've got it working. It's a really great way to sort of get started doing it, so that as little effort as possible. Now, in the Logic App Designer, when I do a checkpoint, one thing to note is there's two types of checkpoints. So here I'm just sending the transaction instance ID, which I've used when I did my start transaction, and that lets me not have to supply all of the data. I just need to go, here's the instance ID for the transaction, here's the stage, did it succeed, is it in progress, and that it's as simple as that to update your transaction. Now, because I've got the data coming in at BAM, so the users now can start seeing this history of what's going on. So I could do a search if I wanted for, so let's see if we grab the email address for Greer here. So I can do a search for email, and I can now see all of the transaction we had related to that user. So that's how it's easy to get this holistic view across many interfaces, what's actually going on. So you can start troubleshooting. You might see one of them got an error. Now, there's a couple of things I can do here. So some of them would be, if there was a problem with this transaction, I could mark it as a favorite, and then I could come back to it later on. So that would appear in my favorites tab over here. I can also assign that transaction to another user. So I could ask Sri Hari to go and have a look at that transaction for me if I assign it to him. If we have errors, there's a couple of things with errors. So firstly, we have this action required tab. Now, I don't think I have any errors at the minute in this transaction, so we'll just jump to this other one over here where I definitely do have some errors. So you can see I've got a list of transactions that are currently in the errored state that I haven't dealt with. So action required means I haven't dealt with them. So what I could do is this is my to-do list, so I could come in and I could choose to ignore the transaction, or I could reprocess it. So I could say it's fine. So we might put a ticket number here if we need to for support, or maybe the ignore thing is really the external system we were going to send the data to. We checked and everything was fine there, so we know this doesn't need to be reprocessed. So that would now go away from the list, and you would be able to see in the transaction search, you can see down here I've chosen to ignore that one. Now in my person sync one over here, let's pretend, so if we go and get this person's transaction here, let's pretend this was an error and I want to reprocess it. So you can actually reprocess even if it was successful. So there's two ways you can do it. You can bulk reprocess by selecting them and clicking reprocess and continue, or the other option is if you're doing just one, you can have it open and you can choose to reprocess from here. You do have an option to view and repair the message if you need to modify the data, so you can allow a user to do that as well. And then I would click confirm. That's going to drop that message back onto service bus. So that's been successfully reprocessed. And then I can go over here. Now my Logic app, the trigger only runs, you'll see here, it only runs about every 5 minutes. So I'm going to just force that trigger and you'll see it fired. So I should have a Logic app that's starting to run here. And I think we got an error here for some reason. So I'm assuming I've probably got a forced error. Yeah, that user already exists. So here we should see a new transaction is starting to appear. So you can see the new transaction started to appear here. And as the events get processed by the BAM API, you'll see this is in process at the minute, and those boxes will tick, and then you'll see there's an error. One of them will have failed. There we go. So that's shown up as an error now, and you can see that the existing user lookup failed, and failed to complete. So you could reprocess that again if you wanted to, and you would see if I just go and put the search back. So you would see on this one down here, it's marked that I reprocessed it, so we know that that user message got. Now, when it comes to dashboards, what I can do here is I can create dashboards. So you get out of the box, you'll get a friendly dashboard telling you what's going on. You can modify, you can modify the dashboard, and you can add your own widgets. So you can build some queries here, and you can choose the type of graph that you want and that kind of thing. And you can update and add new widgets to the dashboard. Here I've just got a summary of, based on the last 7 days, what messages have been processed, how many have failed, when did the transactions start, and that would just give me a simple overview for that business super user and the support user to see how things are going. Now I can also do monitoring, so there's a couple of types of monitoring, and you can see here if you go into this area, you'll see you've got the list of incidents that you've had, and I can open up an incident and see, so the first thing is, we'll note this for in a few minutes time, the duration threshold was too long, so that caused us to raise an incident, but I've got a history of incidents here. I can choose to acknowledge them, so we know they're being worked on. When they're finished, we can close them, and we know those incidents are resolved. Now, incidents can be based on either an exception, so here I can define a policy of what to do when I get exceptions, so we can trigger alerts from that. You can put notes in here that would be included in your alerts if you want to provide some help for the person who gets the notification. You can configure that here. You can also configure notification channels, so you can have notifications via email, Teams, ServiceNow tickets, DevOps tickets, and a bunch of other different types. We also have an escalation policy, so if your notifications and incidents aren't being dealt with, we can trigger escalation for them and let the next level up know that something hasn't been dealt with. Duration monitor, so this is one of the ones that triggers alerts in this process. So let's imagine the PowerShell to run to set the mailbox up might take a long time to run. So what I can do down here in my activate mailbox transaction is I can enable duration monitoring for that PowerShell activation stage. And what I've done is I've said if it takes more than 12 minutes, it's a warning. More than 14 minutes, it's an error. And I can just put some help in here for the person if I want to leave a note for them when they get the notification. And that basically would be a way of, when things are taking longer than expected, you can trigger alerts to preemptively go and deal with an issue before there's errors happening. That's something you can't really do in Azure today with Logic Apps, for example. They just run and the alerts wouldn't really fire until you've got an error. We can also do query monitoring. So if you had a query that you wrote, let's say if you had a day where you had nobody who was a new user, maybe that's a good example. You could write a query to say, I expect at least one person to get processed each day, each week. If that doesn't happen, raise an error. So you could monitor a query here, and you could provide thresholds and support to trigger off the back of that. Now, I think most of our users just really like this tree to give them the holistic view. You can see the trees lit up by the monitoring here, so that one we know has got an error currently on it. You'd be able to go and track and trace your errors. The action required tab lit up before because because we had that error from the reprocessing. So I know I've got something to do in this application at the minute. Next, we'll jump into a summary of what we've talked about today. Thank you for listening to today's video. A quick summary of what we did is we looked at the centralized business and operations and self-service across the entire AIS estate. So the first thing was the centralization. One of the challenges customers have with Azure integration services is that you've got this fragmented group of logic apps and service buses, and it, to a customer who's not familiar with it, it feels like everything's kind of scattered around. So serverless 360, business applications lets you centralize the management of those Azure resources, and business activity monitoring lets you centralize the management of your business transactions. So that's a thing people like, to have that view in one place. But also, business activity monitoring allows you to have that ability to get that view across the entire AIS estate. So, all of Azure integration services, so you can send BAM events from API management, from functions, from different features. It's not just for logic apps. You can do Power Automate, we'll show in previous videos. So once you've got things coming into the BAM API, this is where we can now start doing tracking. We can trace through what happened. We've got the action required feature, which is a to-do list of what things you need to do to sort errors out. Repair, resubmit. We've got dashboards. We've got failure monitoring, query monitoring, and duration monitoring. So I think that duration monitoring feature here, really good one if some of your transactions are just taking longer than usual. You can spot the problem and do something about it before an error happens. So finally, just a quick reminder that you can send events to Serverless 360 from a number of places. So we've got BizTalk. If you're a BizTalk migration customer, you might choose to send BizTalk events and then start sending logic apps as you start using them. You can use it with Data Factory and Synapse if you're doing a data platform, and then you can do functions, custom code, API management, and a bunch of other stuff. Now, some people might be building solutions that don't use logic apps, but they do use other things on the Azure platform. So maybe you're building an application where you're just using custom code, so you can send data from PowerShell, or you're doing Node.js. It's just an API called a BAM, so you can instrument into BAM from a lot of different apps. But also you might be using other integration vendors. So if you're doing MuleSoft or SAP's BTP product or some of the others, if you can send a message over an HTTP call, you can call the BAM API and you can get data into there. So I think that really makes us easy to use for any customer who's probably using Azure but might be using something other than logic apps or AIS. Thank you very much for listening today. We'd love to hear from customers who'd like to learn more about business activity monitoring. Please get in touch and we'll arrange a demo call with you and we can chat more about your requirements. Thanks for listening.